I'm a 38-year-old female, and for a few months, I worked a night shift at a 24-hour gas station in northern West Virginia after previously being fired from my career job. For the most part, the job was fairly easy and allowed me to get by just enough to pay the bills. However, I witnessed a pretty horrifying string of events on the job one night that I'll never forget. It was a Wednesday night. It started off like any other normal shift I'd work, any day of the week. A few people stopped in here and there, mainly buying lottery tickets and paying for gas. Fast forward a few hours, it was 3 a.m. and the little traffic we had fully died down. I was sitting up front when I watched a maroon Lincoln sedan pull into the lot and park in the back behind all the gas pumps. A couple minutes later, a woman emerged from the passenger seat who sort of stumbled out of the car and started approaching the gas station. I watched as she walked at a rather brisk pace in a nervous kind of fashion. As she walked, I instantly noticed that her face was pale and that she had sweat perspiring on her forehead. Mind you, it was the dead of winter, and I'm pretty sure the temperature was below 0 degrees at night. She walked past the counter and headed straight towards the back, towards the bathrooms. She came out about 5 minutes later, but her body language was really starting to concern me. She was kind of pacing back and forth in the aisles, occasionally peeking her head around and looking out the windows towards the car. I thought about saying something, but right as I did, she walked right out of the door and headed in the direction towards the car that was still parked across the lot. About 5 minutes went by and the car didn't move. Suddenly, the car went into reverse and did a 180 towards the gas pumps, where it parked beside one. The car was much closer now, and I was able to see the woman inside, who was accompanied by a man in the front seat. Another minute went by until the passenger door fully opened, and the woman who previously came in began walking towards the building again. This time, when she walked by, it was becoming more and more obvious to me that something was wrong. She walked towards me at the counter, holding a $20 bill, and said, "20 on pump 5, in a shaky, quiet voice. I took it and continued to watch her body language, seeing that her hands were clenched in a fist, in addition to the sweat on her forehead. I looked at her with concern, and I think she noticed it on my face. Not trying to make it obvious, in case the man was watching me from the outside, I said, "Is everything alright?" And she looked up at me, not saying a word for at least 5 seconds, until she replied, "Yes, thank you." I didn't buy it, and continued to question her, saying, "Do you know who that guy is in the car?" And she responded with a nervous laugh and stuttered, Yeah, that's my boyfriend." I didn't believe any of this to be true, and watched as she approached the car. Right as she opened the passenger door, the man handed her something, and she grabbed it, promptly turning back towards the building. She walked in, and instantly went to the chip aisle, where she paced around again, and eventually brought a bag of potato chips to the counter. I was finally able to make out what the man handed her. It was a $5 bill. I looked at her again with concern, but didn't want to continue badgering her, also acknowledging the possibility of her temperament being from an argument or something. She slapped it down on the counter, then did something I never would have expected. She leaned in and reached towards the lighters, which are close to the back of the counter by me, and faintly muttered under her breath, "I need help." Those words raised the hairs on the back of my neck, but it finally confirmed my suspicions. I casually replied, acting like I was ringing her out, and said, "Do you want me to call the police?" And she nodded her head in approval. I pressed the panic button that was located under the counter, which alerted 911 of an emergency. Right after doing so, I looked up and noticed that the girl was heading towards the exit with her stuff. I ran around the counter and went straight for the door. Just as she was about to walk out, I told her to stop and lock the door before she could leave. She instantly started crying and was clearly in shock from the whole situation. She kept repeating these words that still give me the chills just thinking about it to this day. "He's gonna get mad. He's gonna get mad." I told her to follow me, and I took her to the back room, where I deadbolted the lock shut, locking us both inside. I assured her that the police were on their way and everything was going to be okay. I had no choice but to remain calm in the situation, because if I didn't, I knew she would freak out even more. However, the sheer feeling of panic continued to grow when the man suddenly started pounding on the outside door of the gas station, screaming the girl's name. This occurrence was enough to send her into total shock, and she just sat down, curled up under the table, and completely became emotionless and silent. The pounding lasted another minute, until it finally grew quiet. I didn't know if the man had broken through or what, but I wasn't about to go out there and risk finding out. A couple minutes after that, the police arrived, kicked the back door down, and we eventually came out. I was instantly separated from the girl, who got picked up in an ambulance. I was taken to the police station to give a statement, where I explained everything that happened. After that, I was sent home for the rest of the night and didn't hear anything until a couple weeks later. I found out online that the woman was being trafficked that night. She was kidnapped about 45 minutes away in a Walmart parking lot. The article gave a description and a sketch of the suspect, which looked like the guy I saw that night in the car. Apparently, the driver was heading south to wherever he was planning on taking her. The woman was able to convince the man to pull over so she could use the restroom, in which he did. While he was there, he sent the girl back in to pay for gas. The girl must have convinced him to let her get a snack, which explains why she came back inside for a third time after she realized I could possibly help her. I have neither heard of or spoken to this girl since that day. I don't consider myself to be a hero by any means, but I'm glad that I was in the right place at the right time. I'm still a little shook from that night, even to this day, but I just hope that the victim of this horrific crime is doing okay. For a bit of context, I'm 18 and work at a gas station in the backwoods of Tennessee. 2 weeks ago, when I clocked in at 8, the store was completely dead. I figured it was going to be a pretty easy night because the location of this station was away from main roads. It actually used to be a popular area until about a decade ago when a new freeway was built. It affected everyone's business that was located here, so many of the buildings around are abandoned. The gas station is on a stretch of road surrounded by these old buildings, so many of the local druggies have claimed it as their own. At around 11 p.m., I only had an hour left in my shift, so I figured I'd actually get some work done instead of just sitting around and doing nothing. I work the shift alone, which is nice because I can pretty much do whatever I want. It's a nice luxury that allows me to work at my own pace. Anyway, I noticed that we were almost out of barbecue chips, so I had to get them from our storage space. I'm not sure why, but the storage space is in the basement of the station. I've always hated going down there, just because it gives me the creeps. Why the owner decided to store everything down there is beyond my comprehension. As I was about halfway down the steps, I heard something fall on the other side of the room. I began to hear what almost sounded like footsteps coming towards me that increasingly grew louder with each step. I sprinted up the stairs and locked the door to the basement, panicking like a madman the entire time. When I got back upstairs, I went behind the counter to the store computer so I could check the security cameras. I flicked over to the one that looked into the basement, and there was this guy just standing there, smiling up into the camera. He had a look of absolute insanity in his eyes, but he didn't look like the average junkie in the area. He was clean-shaven and dressed in what looked to be jeans and a button-up shirt of some kind. Honestly, if he walked into the store, I wouldn't have batted an eye. Despite that, he was definitely down there, just looking into the camera, smiling. It shook me to my core. I called the store owner, and at first, he was pretty mad that I called him in the middle of the night. But after he heard me, he realized how freaked out I sounded, and his tone changed. He told me he'd be there in 15 minutes, and to just lock the main door to the store and make sure the man didn't go anywhere. I asked if I should call the police, but being the tough guy he is, he didn't want me to do that just yet. I locked the entrance to the gas station and went back to looking at the man. He was still there, just smiling up at me. Over the course of the next 3 minutes, he stood there with that terrifying grin. Then all of a sudden, it was like he unfroze and he walked out of the camera view. My boss showed up soon after, armed with a shotgun. When I let him in, he immediately went to the basement. I went with him, just because I felt safer being with another person. We searched the entire basement, but ended up finding nothing. My boss ultimately chalked it up to me being tired and hallucinating. But I know what I saw. I still work there, and I still get creeped out every time I'm inside. I had to drive back from a 16-hour drive, which I plan on taking in one go. I'm a female, and I've always considered myself to be very independent. Before departing, I stopped at a gas station to fill up on gas and get a snack at a very busy cluster of gas stations in the middle of nowhere. It was a few hours shy of Sacramento. I parked off to the side after gassing up so I could stretch, use the bathroom, and replenish my road snacks and Red Bull in preparation for the road trip. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, and I got back on the road. When I was about an hour in, I got a tire pressure warning light signal on my dashboard. Normally, I'd stop on the side of the road to assess, but something in my gut told me not to. It was a very empty stretch of highway, with curves and a soft shoulder. The vehicle seemed to be handling fine. It was also a rental, and I paid for extended insurance, so I wasn't too worried about it. I eventually hopped out of the left lane and noticed a sign for a town that was 9 miles up the road. I decided to take a chance and made my way to a small Valero next to what looked like an abandoned diner. I pulled in with hopes of finding an air pump in case there was a slow tire leak. I didn't see one, so I parked and got out of the vehicle. I immediately heard a hissing sound and watched the tire slowly sink until the rim touched the ground. It was definitely inconvenient, but I figured a rental SUV would have a full-size spare, so I checked the trunk and found a donut tire. I got on the phone with Enterprise, and they said they could send someone to put the spare on in about an hour. Annoyed, I replied, "No thanks, I can do it in 10 minutes." They also gave me the option to swap the car out in Sacramento the following day. It was Sunday, so all the car shops near me were closed. I decided that I would put the tire on myself, then possibly swap it out the next day. Once I started working on the tire, I had to wave off a few very nice Good Samaritans, but one car in particular, with 3 males, was extra pushy about helping. COVID luckily gave me an added excuse in requesting that they keep their distance and go about their way. I spoke loudly and firm enough, in my insistence, that it caught the attention of the few other people in my vicinity standing at the gas pumps. Eventually, they gave up and drove off. I swapped out the donut and started driving, contemplating my next move. It was December, and I was not about to brave the Shasta mountain pass on a donut, nor try and drive on that rubber thing the rest of the 10 hours home. But I really needed to get home. I searched tire shops, but everyone I found was closed because it was Sunday. Then it dawned on me to search Walmart. I knew I could be cutting it close, but I thought that if I could make it to Sacramento in time, I could get a cheap, full-size tire at the auto center before they close, so I could make it home that night. I pulled in with about 20 minutes to spare and explained my situation to the very kind, grandfatherly man working there. I let him know that I wanted to keep the flat tire to return to the rental company, just in case. As I was waiting in the dingy Walmart Auto Center lobby, the old man walked in with a very serious look on his face, holding a pair of pliers in his hand. Clasped between the metal pliers was a box blade. He asked me if I had gotten into any altercations or made someone angry. Completely puzzled, I said, "No, I'm not from around here. I was just passing through." He said that it was almost impossible for the blade to have been lodged in my tire in the fashion in which it was. He asked if I had noticed anyone following, with an inflection of concern in his voice that made my blood run cold. To be honest, I had been so preoccupied with figuring out my next move, I wouldn't have noticed if someone had been. My mind immediately went back to the overly pushy men at the gas station. As I thought about it more intently, they didn't actually stop at the gas station. They just pulled in next to my car and then left. I stuttered in, I don't know. The old man told me to take a drive around the building and into the neighborhood and watch my rearview mirror. He instructed me to pull back into the mechanic bay and honk, explaining that they'll come out. He told me that this was an all too common ploy, used on that stretch of highway. He explained how these people will insert the blade, just enough to get people to break down on the deserted stretches in between the small towns. I thanked him profusely and got back in my rental to test the waters. Luckily, after a few erratic lefts and rights, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I looped back onto the highway and pressed on into the night. The dark, desolate highway loomed in a more threatening manner as every nerve in my body was on high alert. It wasn't until I was on the road for about 15 minutes when I saw the same car from earlier. I started to freak out, but I kept driving, looking back occasionally. They ended up following me for 2 whole hours, until they eventually got off at an exit. I've never been targeted before, and I'm generally pretty aware of my surroundings. I still don't know what those people were up to, but it was definitely no good. This experience definitely rattled my false sense of immortality. To all those traveling along the I-5 stretch past Bakersfield alone, be mindful of where you stop in emergencies. I try to not think about what could have happened if my independent ego had overridden my gut instinct and I had stopped on the shoulder instead.